Welcome to the LB's The Lover of Books author chat. Now to introduce this wonderful debut novelist. Bradeigh Godfrey is a physician, a mom of four, and a writer. Her medical career is focused on caring for veterans with visible and invisible disabilities, and she is passionate about improving quality of life and wellness in veterans through research, teaching, and clinical work. She's an avid reader and a book reviewer and can be found on Instagram at Bradeigh Godfrey. And she loves to share her latest reads. We will be sure to ask her about those at the end. Bradeigh also co-writes romantic women's fiction, if you didn't know that, under the pen name Ali Brady. And Imposter is her debut novel solo. So I'm so excited to welcome you here. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what people have said about this book. Lisa Unger says, quote, "As slick and slippery as a dark, icy road, Imposter has it all. Tense, immersive, and smart. This is a must read." Mary Kubica says, "Everything a psychological thriller should be: unsettling, totally immersive, and completely unpredictable. Spine-chilling, jaw-droppingly good." I can't think of a better way to describe it. So welcome. So glad that you're here.
Thank you so much.
Can you just give your quick blurb on how you describe Imposter?
Yes. Okay. So it is a psychological thriller focusing on the relationship between two sisters who have been estranged for a few years. And the younger one reaches out to the older one and says, "I'd like to reconnect." And so they go out to dinner together, and it's an icy, snowy night in Chicago in January, kind of fitting that it's wintertime now. And I'm in the middle of snow right now. And they are driving together, and they get into a car accident. And before they get into this accident, the younger sister says to the older one that she has something to tell her that's of life and death importance, but she doesn't get a chance to tell her because this accident happens. The younger sister is severely injured in the ICU. The older sister has a concussion, and her memories of this crash are kind of spotty, but she is pretty sure that someone was following them, and she thinks it may have had something to do with this life and death matter. So she starts to dig into her sister's past and finds out that there's a whole lot going on in her sister's life that she didn't know about.
Well, let's get talking about all that, because first of all, I don't know how you could have gotten better reviews from two awesome writers. So how excited were you to read Lisa and Mary's reviews and the other ones? I mean, you've had so much great feedback from.
Yeah, I think I cried. Yeah, it was amazing.
How did you find out? Did you find out that from your publisher? Did you see it?
This whole process of getting blurbs is such a weird thing. So I had kind of known Mary through, I did an Instagram live with her and I talked with her. I'm not like close friends with her, although I so admire her. And so it was like totally a long shot. You know, she's a big deal. And I was like, would you mind reading this if you have time? You may not have time. And she was like, oh, I'd love to read it. And so she sent that to me and my publicist at the same time. And I think the publicist like immediately responded and was like, ah! So that was great.
That is so exciting, because I mean, I think the hardest part, from what I understand, is just getting people to read your book, because there's so much out there. And how do you convince them to read your book? And I'm so glad they did, because I think it gave it a highlight that it needed to get that momentum. So congratulations on that. Now, I mentioned that this is your first solo book, but you have written a book before. Can you give us a quick description on The Beach Trap?
Sure. The Beach Trap is also about two sisters, strangely enough, but it's a very different relationship. The Beach Trap is about two girls who go to camp when they're 12. And it's sort of like a reverse Parent Trap. So they go to camp when they're 12 and they find out at camp that they share a dad. So they're half sisters. And when they find that out, because one of them was raised by the dad, the other one was not raised by the dad, and their friendship sort of crumbles, and they don't speak again for 15 years until their father dies and he leaves them a rundown beach house in Florida. And one of them wants to keep it. One of them has reasons why she wants to sell it. So they reluctantly team up to renovate it over the course of the summer. And along the way, they face some old wounds. They repair their relationship. They each have a romance. So, yeah.
Now, I see some similarities, but that's two pretty big different genres there.
Very
so
different.
How did you get to writing, through the co-author as Ali Brady, to here? If you can kind of describe that, because it's not your usual journey.
Yeah. So when I initially just started sort of playing around with writing, It was sort of in this, I liked writing suspenseful things, but I leaned sort of toward women's fiction in that I really like writing about relationships. And I think that hopefully that comes through even in Imposter. I still really love to write about relationships. And I love writing thrillers. And I've been writing, I wrote Imposter in 2019. Publishing just takes a really long time. So The Beach Trap actually wasn't written for like a year and a half after I had sold Imposter. Imposter was sold, done, turned into the publisher, and then we decided to write The Beach Trap. And so my co-author, Alison Hammer, and I have been really good friends and writer friends and critique partners. So we trade pages, and she's previously published. So we just had this crazy idea to write a book together, and it's completely different than what I write normally, but I love it. It's a nice sort of break, and it sort of uses two different sides of my brain. So I love it.
Do y'all have plans to write again as co-authors?
Yes, we have another one coming out in May. It's called The Comeback Summer.
And are they the same characters, or is it
Nope.
something completely new?
Different characters.
Okay, we'll be looking forward to that. Can you tell us how it's different writing, by yourself versus writing with another author?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's sort of pros and cons. Writing can be kind of lonely when you're doing it all by yourself, and you sometimes don't know how it's coming through. And I think that's why it's so helpful to have good, beta readers or a critique partner that can read for you, and you can say, is this scene working? And so when I write with Alison, that's sort of built in, right? Like I'm writing a chapter, she's writing a chapter, we're trading it. Whereas if I'm writing by myself, I'm sort of muddling along for a while by myself, and I feel like I have to write like a good 100 pages or so before I can show it to like my agent or somebody and get their feedback. So I feel like there's more, I don't know, there's a little bit more muddling along in the dark when it's all by yourself. You don't have another person to bounce ideas off.
Well, and it sounds a little bit more social too. And was that one written during COVID at all?
Yes.
Or
Mm-hmm.
So that's a nice little benefit that you had each other during that time.
Yes, we needed something light and happy.
Excellent. Now for this one, like you went, I did not know that you had written the thriller and then the beach. Is it hard to switch back and forth? Like does a piece of your brain have to click on or off? Because those are just so different. I mean, sunny, happy. I mean, you can tell by the covers, right? The colors
Yeah.
and the mode, but how do you do that?
So I tend to not be working on two books at the same time. I just think that's too difficult. So if I am drafting, like writing the first draft of one book, I try to just do that. And I may be doing some like revisions or copy edits on another one, but I try to stay in one mode because it is really hard. The writing voice is different. The way I just use sentences and the images, it's all very different, right? If it's supposed to be like dark and moody and suspenseful versus like light and happy and romance. So yes, I try to focus on one at a time.
Yeah, I mean, the pace alone has to be completely different. For your next solo novel, are you going to stay in that psychological thriller genre road? Or are you do you see yourself branching off at some point?
So my next solo book is going to be called The Followers. It's coming out, I think, the end of August of 2023. We don't have a cover yet, so not a whole lot has been announced about it yet, but I'm really excited about it. It is suspense. It's not the same as Imposter, though. It doesn't have as many medical elements, but it's definitely suspenseful, hopefully keeps people turning pages.
Awesome. Now, your bio talks about your treatment of vets. Does that also include psychological treatment? Because I know a lot of it was amputees, like I saw physically their ailments, but then you also said invisible. So I was wondering sort of where you fit into that, if you had some background in psychological treatment.
Yeah, I'm not a psychiatrist, but a lot of my patients do have psychiatric issues, mental health issues. And a lot of them also have things like brain injuries that aren't necessarily visible to the eye. And so they're dealing with them internally, whether it's, cognitive issues or communication problems or memory issues that affect them. And those things can be, just as devastating, sometimes more devastating than if you lose a limb.
Yes. I can imagine that it all sort of mixes in with your medical treatment plan, because it's not like you can compartmentalize, a patient. So how have you ever come across Capgras syndrome in your work?
No, it is so rare after brain injury. So I had to do research on it, obviously. So I looked up, case reports about it and as much medical information as I could. And then I went online to a big Facebook group that has people who, physicians who work with people with brain injuries, and asked them, has anybody seen Capgras syndrome in real life? And there was only a few of them, but they were able to tell me, what the patients were like and what the difficulties were and how they tried to treat them. It was super fascinating.
I mean, it sounds, I've never even heard of it. And so I was so impressed with how easily you were able to describe what it was, so that the reader, not having a medical background, could understand this character. So thank you for that. Christine wants to thank you for working with veterans. She lives next to Fort Hood, and she knows how invaluable your work is. So
I love it.
I
love
the
veterans.
Now on this one, you kind of want to take, I want to take one sister at a time, because they're alike in some ways, but they're very different. So let's talk about Lillian. We know she's a wife, she's a mother, she's lost her parents, she's been sued for medical malpractice, and she has a strained relationship with her sister and losing connection with her husband. Is that a pretty good?
Yep.
Okay. So before we get into Lillian, I'm assuming you have used part of your medical background as a doctor to help you round out Lillian as a character. Is that a good?
Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned at one point when Lillian was being introduced by her husband, when the doctor got dropped. How often does that happen? And is that pretty common, or do you?
Yeah, it's so common that happens. It's sort of almost a joke in, women in medicine that, you'll be standing in a panel and they'll be introducing all the male doctors, like Dr. Jones and Dr. So-and-so and Dr. So-and-so and Sarah. And Sarah's like, I'm a doctor. And it's not that you don't mind, it's not that you mind being called by your first name. It's just like the blatant difference, right, between men getting the title and women not getting the title, that it just sort of stands out to you sometimes. And it's very common when you are, a woman, that patients, you walk into a room, even if you introduce yourself, I'm the doctor that's going to be taking care of you while you're here in the hospital. Then you walk out and they'll say to their, wife, that nurse was nice. And I love nurses, but Absolutely. It's a different role, right? We have different roles. And you shouldn't assume what someone is based on how they look.
That's right. I figured that is what the case was, but I wanted to confirm. Now, there was a time when you talked about the doubts as a physician, and I know a reader here, Liza, if I'm going to unmute you, if that's okay. She asked a wonderful question, and I want to go ahead and just highlight her and let her ask this, because her phrasing was better than mine.
First of all, I love both of your books, and I just also put a comment that, as a medical professional myself, I am a psychiatrist. I love the level of your detail. I thought it was perfect. So, and I just kind of, question I had was about the guilt, right? Obviously, Lillian is a caregiver. She was a caregiver to her sister, and then she was a caregiver now as a physician, right? And she felt like she failed her sister, and then she was sued as a physician. Mm-hmm. So this idea of guilt, right? Being a caregiver and the guilt that goes with it when you don't live up to your expectations. Just wanted to hear more of your thoughts on that and how that inspired this novel and the themes.
Sure. Yeah, that is such a good question. Thank you. So yes, a lot of guilt. Lillian is the type of person who just has super high expectations for herself. She was kind of the overachiever daughter who, wanted to do all the right things. She took care of her younger sister, and now it's like everything has sort of started falling apart for her. And she has this, we talk about imposter syndrome, this idea that, maybe I don't really deserve to be where I'm at in my life, that somehow I made it through, I got through medical school and then residency, and I married this guy, and I had a baby, and now I can't handle it all, and there's something wrong with me. And I think she, internalizes all of that, and she has lost sort of faith in herself and her ability to make decisions, to think for herself. She's really pretty lost at the beginning of the book, and kind of as it goes through, and she sort of regains some of that confidence in herself.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Liza.
Thank you.
I know that there was another question Someone said, how do you manage as you, because Lillian's having to do the same thing, right? I think that's where so much of her self-doubt comes from. But how do you manage balancing being a mother, a physician, a writer, and probably all the other things that describe you?
Well, people ask me that, and I am always like, I don't know. How do I manage that? Because I don't know. I think it is a constant struggle, right? I've heard that people say that, balance doesn't mean that you have everything perfect all the time. It's this idea of being on a balancing, like a balance beam or on a tightrope or something where you are actively juggling all the time. And I think it was Nora Roberts who talked about how, when you're a mother and you have a career or maybe more than one career, and other people depending on you, that you have all these balls in the air and you just have to know which balls are safe to drop, right? Some balls are glass and you can't drop them. Some balls you can drop. So I think that's part of, I don't know, what I've tried to figure out is what areas I can let go for a little while, figuring out where my limits are and what I need to spend time on. I don't know. It's a work in progress. It's very tough, but I have a super supportive husband, great kids. So I feel super lucky.
Well, I think there is a misnomer that you can have it all, right? So
Yeah.
the fact that being honest and upfront of, it may look perfect on the outside for Lillian, right? Like she, has this great job and husband and family, that sometimes it's not as pretty as it seems, especially with her self-doubt.
Yeah.
Now let's go ahead and move on to Rosie, Lillian's younger sibling. Obviously, we know that Lillian's raised her. She has feelings of abandonment, and those have resulted now in unhealthy relationships with men. Would you say that people that have that abandonment issue, are they at a higher risk for being in these unhealthy relationships because of that need to feel wanted and loved? Is that, did you, like when you were doing research, is that?
Yeah, that is a great question. So one of the things that I had to look into when I was trying to figure out these two characters is I didn't know from personal experience what it's like to be the younger sister. I'm the oldest and I didn't raise my siblings like Lillian did, but there was still a lot of sort of responsibility, like watch your sister, be a good example for your sister. It was that type of thing, right? And so I could relate to Lillian's, sense of responsibility as the oldest, but I could not get in the head of this younger sister. And so I think I put a call out on a writing group I was in online and just said, has anyone had experience being the younger sibling and was basically raised by an older sibling? Would you be willing to talk to me? And I had one person talk to me, and it was so eye-opening to hear her talk about how, she really bonded with her older sister as if her older sister was her mother instead of a sister. And so when the sister moved away, which of course is a normal thing for a sibling to do, right, to go on and have their own life, but it felt like she was being completely abandoned by her mom. And it was really hard. And she said she went through a lot of periods where she made bad decisions and, was just living kind of a crazy life, sort of looking for that sense of like connection and stability. And after that, I did some more reading and learned more about the effects of this sort of role, this strange role between siblings and how it affects the younger siblings. So there seems to be a lot of issues that can come for both the younger and the older.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating, the dichotomy of one having to completely raise a child, leave, and then her suffering the guilt of that, and then the younger one just being so angry at being left. Now, she does go through sessions with a psychologist or psychiatrist of this theory of victim or survivor. And I really thought that was interesting. Where do you think Rosie ended up on that spectrum? She kind of went back and forth through the whole thing. And sort of, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a really interesting question. I don't think I've been asked that yet. I really enjoyed writing that part. And it was sort of part of the very last draft. It was my editor saying, can you dig more into this piece of Rosie's experiences as she's trying to sort of process these relationships that she's had in the past and how she's going to conceptualize them, and thinking about how the different ways that you view what she went through, and if you call yourself a victim or a survivor. I'm not sure that if she ever really settled out on it, but I think there was sort of I just really enjoyed kind of wrestling through that with her. I do like to think of her, you know, being in a pretty good place by the time she has gone through all the therapy sessions and she's reaching out to her sister. I think she is doing pretty well, and which is why it's so sad when she, you know, ends up with a brain injury.
Yeah, to me, that conversation was so enlightening because I don't know that it is one or the other, right? Like she wants to feel strong, and in feeling strong, she wants to say, well, I'm not a victim, but then she also feels guilt and doesn't want to say she's a survivor because of her part. So I think that that's also a gray area that needed to be talked about, and that those emotions were authentic. So thank you for that. Now, she does not only have live sessions, which we don't get to hear the dialogue in that, but we get parts of it through her journal, through the online psych journal that she does. Is that something that is put into practice now? Or tell us about that, because that was something I haven't read, which I thought it's almost like a diary, but not quite, because you know someone's reading it.
Yes. So I do not know how frequently it is used, but I do know that there are websites that allow you to type things and share them with your therapist, counselor, whoever you're working with. So it is a real thing that exists. I don't know how often it is done, but obviously it was a useful tool for me to be able to explore some things in Rosie's past. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to get that from her. So I really enjoyed being able to go through, get into her head in that way.
I thought it was a very clever way for us to get not only in her head, but it also gave us all the background of the work that she had done with Dr. V, and the big, as Liza points out, the big no-no for, you know, Daniel, and that stepping over that boundary. Why did you decide to go that route?
I think it goes back to Rosie's I think there's something about her that unfortunately tends to attract men that are probably not as, they're maybe a little unsavory. And I think that the real Daniel Connors, the psychologist Daniel Connors, is not a great guy. I don't think he's, you know, an abuser like some of Rosie's other boyfriends, but I don't think he's a great guy. I think I mean, obviously, right? He sort of just like leaves her in the hospital. So I think he, you know, doesn't have very good ethics. Honestly, I don't think he has a great moral compass.
I liked that you brought that up, because it is a thing you have to be aware of. And I also appreciated with the journal that you need to be careful of passwords, right? If you want it to be private, like take it serious, because obviously her sister was able to get right into it. Now, can you tell us where the idea of this novel came from? Like, was there a seed? Was it something that you, an ending? Like, tell us your thought process.
Yes, so that is great. A lot of times my book ideas come from a lot of different pieces. So I had learned a while before I started writing it about Capgras syndrome. I thought it was incredibly fascinating. And I remember thinking this would be a really cool thing to incorporate into a thriller, but I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know if I wanted to, at first I was thinking it would need to be, you know, a husband and a wife. One of them has it and the other one doesn't, but I just couldn't make that work. And when I finally figured out that I wanted to have the central relationship be sisters, that's when it started clicking into place. And there was different pieces of different books that I had sort of started and then abandoned that were pulled in. So Lillian, and being a pediatrician and being so worried about her daughter and sort of this obsessive anxiety she has, that was pulled from a book that I sort of like wrote part of it, and then it wasn't going well, but I was able to pull that in. This idea of, you know, car accident and brain injury came from another abandoned project. So it was sort of nice to be able to take these things that I thought for a little while that were just going to die in the drawer, so to speak, and be able to pull them into a story. And all of a sudden they clicked and made sense.
Well, I love that you rejuvenated those stories. When did you first start writing? We didn't even talk about that. Like, this was 2019, but you've obviously been writing well before that.
Yes, I was trying to remember when I really started. it's interesting because I was always kind of the kid growing up that liked to write, and I would make up stories and I'd write them down. But, you go to college and then, medical school for me, and there just wasn't any time for like anything creative for so long. And it was later on, after I was, done with all of that and in practice, and I had, these little kids, and I just started feeling like there wasn't anything that was mine. I mean, I loved my job, but it's all about taking care of other people. And I loved being a mom, but it's all about taking care of other people. And so there wasn't anything that was mine. And I just kept having this sort of niggling little voice saying, go back to writing, start writing again. And so it's been a while since I've been playing around with things, but I think it takes a while to get good at writing. And I remember even early on thinking, it took a long time to become a doctor. It's going to take a long time to be a good writer. Even when you finish your medical training, you are still learning. So
I remember when you talked about not having any creative in law school, like I did not read one book for pleasure.
Yep.
The entire time, because you read so much, you have to invest so much time. And so when you get out, it's like, oh my gosh, there are 3 years of books I haven't even seen. But I also think it's cool that it sounds like you're very equal right brain, left brain, because sometimes you get a technical person that doesn't like the creative side as much. And your creative side was screaming, I need to get out, like I need to do this. So that's pretty cool too. How long did it take you to write this novel?
I wrote the first draft very quickly in the summer of 2019 in about 8 weeks. It was just like this furious trying to get it out. And I was, working, and it was summertime. So it was sort of a crazy time. But I would take these weekends. I would go to my parents' house. They live in town. I'd go to my parents' house and I'd stay with them all weekend. And I would write like 10,000 words over the course of a weekend. And that's really how I got this done. I just really felt this pressure to get it out and on a page. And then, there's writing and there's revising and all of that. And then it sold in 2020. So,
well, Alison wants to know, what's the biggest difference between your first draft that summer of 2019 and the final book?
That's such a good question. The biggest difference is that the first draft had chapters from the villain's perspective, from Michael's perspective. And I really loved having those chapters. It pained me to take them out, but the overwhelming feedback from my agent and my editor was that I probably needed to write them for myself to like figure him out, but that it was too much information for the reader, and the reader, you don't want to answer every question for the reader right away. There needs to be some obviously mystery to keep them reading. So I was sad to lose those, but I think it was the right thing to do.
So spoilers, people, if you haven't read, you might want to mute. Can you talk about Michael a little bit more? Because he is a character. I mean, how did you develop him? How did you get inside his head? I mean, he is evil stuff, but God, he is so savvy. I mean, he's good at what he does, obviously.
Yeah. My biggest thing that I realize about him is that he thinks he's a good person. And he thinks that he loves Rosie a lot and that he's the right person for her. I think he truly believes that he's a good person, that he loves Rosie, that he does all the right things. I don't think he has a great ability to see things clearly, see things as they are. And he comes from, we get a little bit of this in the book where we hear about his background, but he comes from a not a great background, had an abusive parent. And I think he never really learned how to deal with some of the issues that he has. And so it sort of all comes out in this desire to sort of control someone else, like Rosie. Like he loves her so much, but he wants to control her. He wants to sort of have her be his and possess her.
Do you agree with Daniel's diagnosis?
Maybe, I don't know. Again, I'm not a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
But yes, and I did have, I think, 2 psychiatrists read the book and weigh in on it. And I also had a couple OBGYNs weigh in because I wanted people to help me out with, obviously there's a lot of psychiatric stuff, and then there's postpartum anxiety and all of that. And so I took feedback and they were incredibly gracious. So, I did the best I could.
I thought it was great. I think for me, I did not realize that he thought that he was doing I thought he was more self-centered, that it didn't really matter if he thought that he was doing the right thing, until at the end when Lillian had to change tactics when it's trauma time. I mean, it's hitting the fan and she has to go into oh, you're such a good person, you did the best you could, and he was buying it. At that point I thought, oh, I did not realize until that moment, that point you're getting across, that he really believed that he was doing the best thing for Rosie. I could not, like, that didn't even cross my brain.
Yeah, I mean, he obviously has an incredibly flawed vision of who he is as a person, right? But I think in his mind, he thinks he's a good person, he's a great person, and Rosie's probably lucky to have him.
Have you ever considered, and books with Courtney, she said and I think so too, I think it would be interesting to get his POV. Obviously you don't want the readers to get too much, but almost as like a small short story, almost kind of, I don't know if y'all remember, this dates me, but how they did with Edward in the Twilight.
Yes,
How like remember. You flip it and you get a little bit more of the crazy.
That's an interesting thought. And a few people have brought that up. They were like, we'd love for you to, send them out in the newsletter or something like that, just some of the extra chapters, which could be interesting. It was really fun writing them because at the beginning, you don't know who he really is. And you get to see him thinking that he's, really a good, thoughtful, loving boyfriend. And then you slowly start to realize he's not.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the worst.
Yeah.
Can you tell us why Chicago? I mean, I think that's where you went to school. Is that why?
I did. Yeah, I went to school there, and my co-author in my Ali Brady life lives there, so I could ask her questions about Chicago. I love the city. I also, for whatever reason, it feels like a very medical city to me. So setting, sort of some with a hospital and, physician characters just made sense. There's so many hospitals there. There's so many medical schools in Chicago. So it just sort of felt like the right place. And for whatever reason, that the car crash scene at the beginning just always in my mind was on Lakeshore Drive in the middle of a snowstorm from the very beginning. So.
Well, you said that it was a medical city. I know that Courtney said how much she loved, she's in the medical field, and how much she enjoyed the medical aspects of it. And Christine, how much she enjoyed having that, Capgras syndrome being highlighted was just so important to it. So I think it just worked. Someone had a question about the cover. Christine, she wants to know if you had any input on your cover. And I just want to say, like, I just don't see this color
So pretty,
like,
right?
that color is just not very prominent. So I love that you chose both of those.
Yes. So cover is so hard because I had no idea what I had envisioned. The cover designer asks you what you like, and I'm like, I don't know, something with two women and like a brain. And so the first few iterations were not quite right because they seemed kind of like science fiction-y. They had like a brain on them, and it just wasn't quite right. And so when we got to the initial version of this, I just really, really liked this idea of these like two faces pointing in different directions. And somebody pointed out when they was interviewing me that that it's almost like they, are sharing a mind, they're sharing a brain in this, these two different women. And but they are looking in completely different directions. So anyway, I really like the symbolism. I had no idea they were going to put a butterfly on the spine, which I love. There's nothing about butterflies in the book, but they are meaningful to me. So I thought that was super cool. It was like a little gift when they put that on there. And I just really love it.
I want to know why the butterfly? Like, we have to, like, that. I wanted to know.
Yeah, it's just meaningful to me because it was like when I was a kid, my grandpa called me a butterfly. It was just a special part of my childhood. And so it was so fun to see that on there, this idea of like finally sort of emerging from your, chrysalis as a butterfly, as a published author, whatever it may be. But I was really, really thrilled.
Well, the part that I loved about it is that the eyes are closed, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's the breakout moment. That's when Lillian finally makes connection with Rosie, is when, one, she realizes a phone call will work, and two, in the room when the lights go out. So to me, that was very, I mean, you don't know it when you first see it, but then after you read the book and you look back at that cover, you're like, oh, that's a good, I mean, I'm glad the eyes actually weren't open because that's so symbolic.
Yeah.
I love a little hidden treat in there. Couple of people wanted to comment on Chicago, how much the beef sandwich. Is there a story behind your beef sandwich, the location where they have the lunch?
They're just sort of an iconic food. You can't really get them anywhere but in Chicago, the Italian beef sandwiches. And I just love them. And yeah, I just thought it made sense that Lillian would have grown up eating them.
Awesome. Then we also have someone saying how much they love the cover. And the people that had the electronic advanced reader's copy never got to see the butterfly. So that was kind of a nice little special treat for them tonight. Let's go ahead, and I want to ask if did you get the okay to say like, yes, that's the cover I wanted then? Is that sort of
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Okay. Yep. They were amazing.
And then what about the audiobook? Because I got to listen to the audiobook as well. So tell us about that process and the two narrators.
Yeah.
I think we're fantastic.
It was really cool. Blackstone is a huge audiobook producer. They're one of the biggest audiobook producers in the country. So I knew they would do an amazing job with the audiobook. So they sent me 3 different narrators, and they were all reading the first chapter, I think, from Lillian's perspective. And so I was able to hear the one that I liked. And I picked Eileen Stevens. And then I said, are you going to use the same one for Rosie? Because I would really love to have a different one if possible. And they said, maybe. Do you have an idea of who you would like to have? And I said, I'd like to have Brittany Presley, who was the audiobook narrator for a character in The Beach Trap. And I just love her. And she also does thrillers. She's amazing. And so I just threw that out there. I had no idea if they would be able to get her. And I did not know until I got a copy of the audiobook later. So I was thrilled.
Did you actually get to listen to it? Because I know some authors do not like to listen to their books.
I did. I listened to it a few weeks after it came out. My publisher sent me to Denver to this sort of like, it was a big convention of independent booksellers, and they had authors come out and talk about their book. And so I flew there. I live in Salt Lake City, so it's close. So I flew there in the morning and I flew back at night, and I listened to the audiobook the whole time when I wasn't actually, doing my presentation. And I finished the whole audiobook in the day, and it was really cool. It was really cool. And I had a lot of distance from the book at that point. I hadn't looked at it for a good year. So it was really cool to hear it.
Kind of brought you back into the middle of it. No, I thought both Eileen Stevens and Brittany Presley did a phenomenal job. And sometimes with an audiobook, if I'm not loving it, I want to make sure that I give the author credit and go to the book then, but this one, I was able to go back and forth, and it was flawless. I thought they did fantastic. A couple of people want to know about the title, Imposter. So both Courtney and Christine have asked, did you pick the title? And was this the original title?
Yes, this was the title all along. We never talked about changing it. It just was the title. That doesn't happen for all books. My next book that will be coming out in August has been through like 5 titles. So.
Well, it was my last author chat with Rebecca Ross for River Enchanted. She was so jealous because she's always wanted a 1-word title book. And then, of course, I announced yours coming up, and I'm like, sorry to tell you this, but the next book is a 1-word title. So I thought that was kind of funny. I think we have a couple, actually, while people get your questions ready, get them together. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask you some quick rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Don't think about it too much. Just off the top of your head.
Okay.
All right. Early riser or late to bed?
Oh, I have to be an early riser because of my job, but I would prefer to be late to bed.
Winter or summer?
Summer.
Illinois or Utah?
Utah. I love my state.
White Sox or Cubs?
Oh, Cubs. Yeah.
Mountains or beach?
I think it's got to be beach. I love the beach.
Hiking or skiing?
Skiing.
Lillian or Rosie?
Man, I love them both. Lillian's easier for me to relate to. I'll say Lillian.
Okay. Women's fiction or psychological thriller?
That's so hard. I can't pick.
No worries. Research or clinical work?
Clinical work, I prefer.
Are you a plotter or a pantser?
Plotter. Detailed plotter.
Book, ebook, or audiobook?
I prefer book.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Those are awesome.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. I know some people have some questions that they were typing in the chat box that they wanted to ask in person. If you typed in the chat box, but you would prefer me to answer it, well, I'll get back to those. But for now, if you want to ask, just go ahead and raise your hand. All right, Mary, I'm gonna ask you to unmute and highlight you. Go ahead.
So first of all, I love the book, and I don't normally read thrillers. I'm actually kind of a nervous person, so I don't read them because then I can't sleep at night. But I really, really like this, and I really like the medical aspect because I love things with that. One of the issues I had, now knowing this is fiction, was I felt like Lillian didn't have any female girlfriends to go to. So she had to rely on, quote, Daniel, you know, because her husband was too busy.
Yeah.
So I felt like that was kind of missing, like maybe a reason why she didn't have close girlfriends to go to, that kind of thing. Because I know if I was in this situation, the first person I would go to would be a girlfriend.
Yes, that is such a great point. And it's so funny because sometimes people will ask questions about things and I'm like, that was in an earlier draft and we took it out. Because you can't have everything in a book, right? But there actually was a character who was actually their daughter's pediatrician, whose name's Asha. They went to medical school together, or they went to residency together, Lillian and Asha. And that was kind of her closest friend. And we do get a little scene between them when Asha is trying to reach out to Lillian, and Lillian is just feeling too overwhelmed, like she can't handle anybody else in her life. And she's kind of pushed people out of her life. And so we unfortunately had to sort of trim that out. But I think it's a great, great point. And I think that's why she was so sort of vulnerable to Michael being able to manipulate her. She didn't have anybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I think the reason why it does work is because they're both so isolated, right? They don't have parents, they don't have friends, and it makes them prey for a character like Michael or anybody else that is unsavory, right?
Yeah.
All right, Liza has a question. Let's go ahead and go
Awesome.
to her. Go ahead.
Well, I actually have two questions. So the first question is, you addressed it to some extent, but just kind of, maybe more explicitly, how is you being physician, right, inspired you to write this story in particular, your experiences with patients or in the workforce as a physician? And then the second one just wants to hear a bit more about your thoughts on the marriage, on Lillian's marriage, right? Because it's about to kind of break up, right? And it was like too much for them to handle, but thank goodness they found light. So those are my two questions.
Okay, great questions. So the first one is about how did my work as a physician sort of play into this? In a lot of ways, taking care of people with brain injuries is it's a very unique field. And I found that, incredibly fascinating, as a physician. But one thing that I also really found sort of, very emotional for me as a doctor is watching the families deal with their loved ones, this new disability. And brain injuries are difficult because the person's personality may be completely different. And Rosie goes through sort of these classic stages of recovery that happen after a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, where she gets really agitated and angry, and that happens very commonly as part of recovery. And it's so difficult for the family members to deal with. And so I just wanted to sort of reflect that and bring that in and sort of, shine a little light on what the family members go through during the recovery after brain injury, because it's very difficult. And towards the end, even though, Rosie has recovered remarkably in many ways, in some ways she is not recovered. And it's obviously very emotional to have somebody that looks like themselves, but isn't quite themselves anymore. And then the second question about the marriage, that's another great question. So I always had this idea that Lillian and Caleb met in medical school, and that Lillian was the better student and that he was struggling, and then she was there to sort of help him along. And now years have gone by and things have kind of switched. She's a pediatrician, which unfortunately is like the lowest paid people in medicine are pediatricians. And he's like a trauma surgeon, and he's, at the top of his game, making a lot of money, super important. And she's really been struggling, and it just shifts their relationship. And now she's, had this episode of really severe postpartum anxiety that sort of shook their relationship. And, now she's had a baby, and that really changed things. Of course, you can feel like you are equals in your marriage. I think this happens a lot in heterosexual marriages. You can feel like you're equals, and then you have a baby, and it just, the sort of the biological burden falls on one person more than the other, and it changes things. Lillian is home, she's breastfeeding, she's doing all of that, Caleb's working. It just completely shook up their relationship. And I think they had to figure out how to navigate it. Caleb started treating her like she was made out of glass, and he was so worried about her all the time. It was being kind of patronizing. And Lillian really, really didn't like that, of course. But then, of course, she also struggled to have confidence in herself as well. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Liza. Just to reiterate that, I think one of the reasons why your plot works, that she is so vulnerable, is that she's really at her lowest, Lillian.
Yeah.
Because her worst fear of being an imposter has now come true in ways, and that Rosie doesn't even recognize her and calls her fake and doesn't want to see her. So, I think that was just the reiteration. I loved that part. I mean, not loved it, but I loved the swing of that plot, because it was quintessential. All right, Christine, I'm going to unmute you, and you have a question. So.
Hi, ladies. It's been really interesting so far. Sorry, I'm in pajamas. I did do the picture real quick. I'm going to talk about the background too. I just want to say that I really enjoyed both of your books. I had The Beach Trap to read at the beach, which was perfect. And then I read this one over the weekend, so it'd be fresh for this. And I wanted to know, and I was the one who lives next to Fort Hood, so I really, really appreciate all the work that you do with veterans, because I come from a long line of military that affects our lives. Are you going to be, do you know if you're going to be touring? Because a lot of people get to tour on the East Coast, but poor little Texas, we're just left out. So I just thought to ask.
I'm going to be in Texas in June.
Oh,
Alison, you're on this call. Alison, when are we going to Texas? We're going to Book Bonanza.
I think it's the end of of June. I'll look it up.
So I'm going there with Alison, and we'll be talking about our Ali Brady book, but of course, we each have our own books as well. So we'll be being able to.
Is that the one that Colleen Hoover?
Yes.
Wrote? I think that's already sold out, unfortunately, because I know a bunch of us at work were trying to get tickets to that. And we're like, it's already sold out. But boy, next year I will sign up early.
Well, maybe Brady and Allison can ask to open up an extra day. It sounds like there may be demand for it.
That's the only reason you're going to get me to Houston driving. Thank you, ladies. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for joining, Christine. All right. If anybody else has a question, go ahead and raise your hand. I'm going to give some of these comments and questions in the chat box. So Kelly Hooker says, not a question, just a comment. And she says, as a speech therapist who works in a medical setting, I appreciated the representation of rehab, PT, OT, speech language, anyways, and how therapy was portrayed. I think that was important to get those representations in there. Was that a conscious decision, or
Yes.
did you? Okay.
Yes, totally conscious. I feel like in so many medical dramas and books, it's like there's doctors and nurses, right? Those are the only people that you show. And there are so many other people who are playing super crucial roles. And it was really important to me to give a shout out to these different people who make a massive difference for patients. And it's funny, a lot of people at work have read it, and they'll somebody cornered me in the therapy gym the other day, and they were like, thanks for the shout out for rec therapy. And I'm like, high five. So I was very happy to be able to give people a little shout out, because it's super important work.
Well, and you're now portraying the family, right? And you see how much work is done. I mean, yes, the doctor comes in and makes decisions and diagnosis and medication, but the hours of work,
Yes.
a lot of time, are the therapist or the nurse, the people that are in that room for so much of recovery. So I love that representation as well. I'm going to ask for the bookberry. She wants to know what your favorite part of the book was, maybe writing it and then maybe reading it or listening.
I really enjoyed writing the journal entries from Rosie's perspective. They shifted quite a bit over the course of the book and what the focus was, but I really loved how they turned out. And so that was really fun for me to write those. And I also really loved writing, this probably is my favorite part to listen to as well, is the scene with the baby monitor that's sort of possessed and is watching her. Writing it, I was freaking myself out and getting chills. And when I listened to it the first time, I got chills as well. So
yeah, that I saw someone take a photo of the book next to a baby monitor, and it kind of gave me the creeps. But I was like, kudos to you for putting that out there. Like that was set the mood. Now, I'm going to flip it. Now, you mentioned it was hard for you to get into Rosie's head, but you did have someone to talk to. But what was the hardest part writing this book for you?
I think the hardest part for me with writing a thriller is that you have to be so meticulous about the plotting. Thriller readers are very, they're very savvy, and they will pick up hints as they go along. And so it's very, very challenging to figure out how much information do I reveal, what red herrings do I drop, what little breadcrumbs do I string along, how fast do I do this? It's very challenging. And if your editor says, let's make this change, that has ripple effects through the whole book. So you are then going through and unpicking all these threads. It's very difficult, very challenging, and it just takes hours and hours and so many passes through. And it can be frustrating sometimes when you think, I don't want to change anything else, because then I have to go change 9 other things.
Well, how many versions, how many drafts of this are we talking about?
I don't know. I don't count my drafts, but I did several different drafts. And then I did, a couple before the book sold, and then a couple, one big, rewrite with the editor where we really worked on all the developmental stuff. And then like a lighter one. So, I'm constantly revising, but there were several large scale changes. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for Alison for coming on as well. You're a co-writer. Just for people that are wanting to see them at that festival they were talking about, they said that there is a wait list that you might want to look into. So if you're wanting to head towards Texas, just keep that in mind. Books with Courtney said that Imposter was one of her top 10 books. So 2022. And just stayed up late to binge it. I know someone was late to get their copy, and she was worried about getting, reading in time. I'm like, oh no, it reads fast. And sure enough, Janelle, are you on here? She was like, she got on, and same thing with Christine. So it's such a fast paced read, and people that I pushed them outside their genre. Mary was talking about that. I think that because what you said, that you really love to highlight relationships. It's not your typical bam, bam, bam thriller. There's more meaningful connections and behind the pages and inside of them. So we really appreciate your time for that. I know you said you have a book coming out, The Followers, is that right? So we'll be looking for that, as well as your follow-up with Alison. But before we go too far, I want to make sure that we hear what your recommendations are for us to read. So it can be something you're reading now, something about to come out, a classic. Just what do you want to tell us to take a look at?
Okay, I have some recommendations. So I'm reading The Winners right now by Frederick Backman. And I read all the Beartown books, and this book is like 700 pages, and I'm reading it a little at a time. It's taking me forever. It's so long, but it's so good. I'm just absorbing it and taking my time. So I'm in the middle of that. So I do recommend that. And if you haven't read those books, start with Beartown and, go through. And then I'll give you 2 thrillers and then a rom-com for totally different. So I really love Claire McIntosh's books, and her latest book is called The Last Party. And I just really liked it. It's set on like a lake between the border of England and Wales, and just the characters are super, super interesting and funny, and it's really well done. So I liked it. I found it very engaging. So I love The Last Party. And then I really am also a big fan of Kimberly Bell, and her latest book is called The Personal Assistant, and it was really fun. Kimberly Bell writes books that are her psychological thrillers are thrilling, they are exciting and thrilling, and there's some sort of cool climax at the end, and I really like that. So I like that one. And then rom-com, I really have liked Maisie Eddings, who is I think her first book came out last year, so this is her second book. It's called Lizzie Blake's Best Mistake, and it's really fun, very fast read. I read it very quickly within just a few hours. It's just funny, heartwarming, swoony, all of that.
Well, Kimberly Bell, I think, is also a fan of yours because she messaged me saying she was sorry that she couldn't make it tonight and
Oh, she's so
and just wanted to
sweet.
wish you luck. Yeah. A lot of people, I think it was right after the holidays, Anissa
Yeah.
said, wished you the best of luck. I know she's met you before, and it's just been a great night to talk books. I'm going to go through a couple more of these comments because there's a lot of love here. People are saying last parties in my pile. Dear wife and the personal assistant were also good from Kimberly Bell, as well as the widow. But somebody brought up the point, Andrea. So she says one of her favorite authors is Tess Gerritsen, also a physician. So when she saw this one, that it was written by a physician, she jumped at the chance to read it, loved it, devoured it. Is that something that gives you a little bit more, I should give you more credibility with the medical? Do you think you'll keep going down that route? I know you said the next one isn't, or do you promote that, or do you just sort of let it lie and let people figure it out that you're a physician?
I feel like it's fine if I let it lie. I don't know. People like to, I don't know. I still feel like I have a hard time sort of integrating these two different parts of these two different careers I have. And people, at work will be like, I heard you had a book coming out, and I'll sort of get, I don't know, flustered and not know how to talk about it. Or my patients will be like, I want to read your book. And it's the people are so incredibly sweet, but I'm also, I don't know, I get embarrassed.
What's been the feedback from the professional world on this book?
Lovely and supportive. But I did tell them, if you don't like it, don't tell me.
That's fair enough. No, I think it's great. And I think it's going to be funny when you have a patient show up with a book and ask for an autograph. Just get ready. It's going to happen at some point. I hope it does. It should. I know the other thing that we're doing to help support you, like Marie, is we are asking libraries to purchase this book. So if
great.
you haven't yet and you purchased your own, still talk to your librarians and say, hey, I found this great book. I think more people need to read it and get that information out there, especially for these debut authors. It's important. And also more people get the chance to read it. Our libraries are so important. Frida McFadden, I didn't know that she was a physician too.
Yeah. She's in a writing group with me online.
Okay, thank you for bringing that back up. I have this note on here.
She's
Tell
so
me about
cool.
this writing group, because you've mentioned it a couple times, little inkling. So tell me, what's it like? What do y'all do? How does it work?
So Frida McFadden, which is a pen name. I don't even know her real name. She is in a Facebook group that's the women physician writers. And so it's all women who are doctors and who write. And some people write novels, and some people write memoirs, and some people write nonfiction. But it's really great for people to sort of come together and ask for ideas on how to market things and how to, get an agent and all this stuff. So it's really a cool group of people. And I'm in a lot of different writing groups, but they're
is that the one that you found out about the sister relationship, or was that a completely different writing group?
That one I asked in another group, the Women's Fiction Writers Association, WFWA. That's how I met Alison, my co-writer for Ali Brady.
And what do you use those for? Tell us their purpose, how they're beneficial, and just give us a little peek behind the curtain there.
Yeah, writing is such like I said, it can feel kind of lonely sometimes. And I don't think I ever would have gotten published if we lived in the age before the internet, because I really needed to see other people in my situation who had little kids or had another job, figure out how to make it work. And so being able to see other people and bounce ideas off of them at whatever stage you're in, because every stage as you try to get published is so different. There's the stage when you're just writing the first things, and then you need a beta reader and you're trying to find critique people, and then you need to find an agent, and that's a whole process to go through. And then after you get an agent, then you have to try to sell the book, and that's another whole thing. The agent takes it around and shops it to different publishers, and each stage has its own sort of things that are scary and things that are exciting. And so to have people to celebrate those and to commiserate with is really important.
I love that community. I love the support there. And I think it's made publishing even better, because now we're getting more diversity, more voices out there, more moms. So I just want to give you a moment. Did you want to say anything to anybody before I close it out? I didn't know I know you invited a couple of people on.
Yeah, Allison's on, just wanting to send her big hugs and kisses. We had a call earlier today to talk about our Ali Brady stuff. So we're in constant communication, but she really saw the all the work and the ups and downs that went into Imposter specifically. She was there through all of them. So thank you. And I think my husband is on as well. And he's just the best. He's an incredible supporter. And anytime I'm like, I just need some time to write, he just is like, okay, and just takes over everything so I can go into my office and shut the door and focus. He's the best.
Well, we want to thank him for allowing you to have those weekends, right? Your parent weekend getaways, because
Yep.
without those 10,000 words a weekend, this novel may have taken a lot longer to get out. So thanks to both of y'all. We appreciate your support of Bradeigh, and we look forward to more coming out. But as I close out, I just want to say thank you, Bradeigh. You've been a fantastic guest tonight. And all your readers out there, thank you for joining. Please make sure you check out her website, follow her on her Instagram, and would love for everyone to follow the LBs, the Lover of Books, on my Facebook group or on my Bookstagram, LB, the Lover of Books, to find out reviews, recommendations, and other author chats. On Sunday, January 22nd, at an earlier time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, I'm hosting a UK author, Claire Pooley, to discuss her novel, Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting. This novel is an escapist read that will transport you, cheer you, and make you smile. Make you too wish that you had Iona's gift for bringing out the best in everyone. Fans of Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine are going to love this. Thank you, Mike, for running the behind the scenes. If you know of an author that you would like to chat with, please let me know, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll be the Lover of Books to catch past chats and to share this one on with friends that you know that have read it. Thanks again, Bradeigh, and everyone joining. And thank your daughter for letting me use her picture she took the photo, guys, for the author chat and announcement. And I thought that was fantastic. She gets a little bit more publicity that way. But I hope everybody has a great night, and keep on reading and let me know what you love. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much. This was so fun. Thanks everybody for listening in.
Good night, everybody.